Welcome to the Hindu Daily. It's like trying to redraw the blueprints of a massive house while the family living inside is rapidly growing at different rates in different rooms.
Yeah, that is a great analogy.
Yeah, and that is exactly the situation with India's proposed 2026 delimitation reform. It is our first topic today, and the sheer scale of this is just hard to overstate.
Right, it really is. We are talking about the 131st Amendment bill, which was proposed alongside the new delimitation bill. And the goal was to increase the maximum number of Lok Sabha seats from 550 all the way up to 850.
Which is a massive jump. I mean, 300 new seats. But to really understand why this proposed reform is such a shock to the system, you have to look back to 1976.
The Indira Gandhi era.
Exactly. During that time, the 42nd Amendment essentially froze delimitation. The government was pushing these aggressive population control measures.
Right, they basically hit pause on redrawing the political map. They did that so they wouldn't penalize the states that were successfully implementing family planning.
Yeah, and then that pause was extended again in 2001 by the Vajpayee government. So the match has been frozen for decades.
What's fascinating here is the sheer demographic friction this creates today. I mean, the new delimitation bill sought to use to basically reallocate seats and redraw territorial boundaries to achieve parity.
Parity meaning equal representation for equal population numbers, right?
Right, exactly. Both intrastate, meaning within individual states, and interstate, between different states. But the deep irony here is the base data they intended to use for this massive course correction.
The 2011 census.
Yes, the population figures from the 2011 census.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have a reform aimed at creating real-time, accurate representation for a rapidly changing modern India, but it's relying on data that is literally 15 years old.
Yeah, it doesn't really compute.
How can that possibly work, especially for you listening when you consider the massive scale of rural to urban migration that has totally reshaped the country since 2011?
It's a huge structural flaw. I mean, you are going to end up with these newly carved constituencies that are immediately out of date the exact second they are drawn.
Right.
You just cannot fix varying population densities caused by migration while entirely ignoring a decade and a half of the most rapid internal migration in India's history.
That makes total sense. But there is an even deeper friction here, isn't there? A constitutional one.
There is, yeah. So Article 81.2 basically says the ratio of seats to population should be the same across all states.
Yeah.
However, the southern states succeeded in that original national goal of lowering birth rates.
Right. They did what they were asked to do in the 70s.
Exactly. So now they have smaller populations relative to the north. If we base parliamentary power purely on current population numbers, we're essentially punishing the South for doing exactly what the Union government asked them to do.
Wow. That is a staggering penalty for good governance.
It really is. It forces a complete reevaluation of our constitutional framework.
Right.
Because states are the component units of the Union, and strong components strengthen the Union.
Right.
So true representation moving forward might need to look beyond mere population numbers. We might actually need additional markers to protect the federal scale of parliamentary representation.
So states aren't politically penalized for their demographic successes. Well, while India is figuring out the mechanics of its democratic representation, a massive democratic earthquake has just occurred in Europe.
Oh, yes. A complete political upheaval.
Over in Hungary, voters have swept their leader, Viktor Orbán, out of office, and this ends a 16-year run.
Which is monumental. I mean, this defeat was handed down by Peter Magyar, and he essentially dismantled a system that Orbán himself proudly termed an illiberal democracy.
Illiberal democracy. That is quite the branding.
Yeah. Over 16 years, his regime meticulously crafted this aura of invincibility. It created an illusion that autocracy is just inevitable. And, when a population believes the outcome is predetermined, it breeds deep voter apathy.
Right. It's that illusion of inevitability, the idea that no matter what happens, no matter how you vote, Orbán will return. Citizens just start to feel that voting is either a forced display of loyalty or just completely futile.
Exactly. But Hungarian voters just completely shattered that illusion.
They really did.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the global shockwaves are undeniable. Because Orbán didn't just campaign against his domestic rivals, he heavily targeted Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky.
Wait, he made a domestic election about Ukraine?
He did. He explicitly asked voters to choose between him and Zelensky, basically blaming Hungary's own economic woes entirely on European Union aid to Ukraine.
Wow.
And he was backed by a very formidable coalition of international figures. You had Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and Xi Jinping, all having strategic and ideological stakes in Orbán's success.
Right, I remember Vance even framed an Orbán victory as a defense of Western and Christian civilization against, like, globalist forces.
Yeah, the rhetoric was incredibly high stakes.
But the voters clearly didn't buy the narrative that their domestic economic crisis was Ukraine's fault. They looked closer to home. They actually saw Orbán funneling Russian oil profits directly into far-right think tanks.
Yeah, the cronyism was glaring.
And they saw massive infrastructure deals operating completely outside of the public interest.
The Fudan University project is probably the prime example of that. Despite massive protests from students in Hungary, Orbán's government pushed forward with a plan, which was backed personally by Xi Jinping, to build a campus for Shanghai's Fudan University right in Hungary.
And the cost of that was just wild.
Yeah, the estimated cost of that single campus was $1.8 billion.
Wait, $1.8 billion? Are you saying he spent more on a foreign campus than his own country's entire higher education budget?
That is the exact math from 2019. I mean, it was a staggering transfer of wealth. And really, that is the ultimate takeaway here.
Yeah.
Hungarian voters actively debunked that whole West versus rest narrative. They demonstrated that a majority can look past international culture wars and actively vote against majoritarianism and cronyism.
Proving that even in deeply entrenched systems, a democratic rebirth is actually possible.
Precisely.
Well, from engineering a political landscape, let's look at a group of scientists trying to engineer biology itself.
This is our third article, moving into the science section.
Yes. And frankly, mosquitoes are terrible enough without getting genetic upgrades, so this whole thing sounds wild to me.
It sounds like science fiction, but it is very real. Malaria kills over 500,000 people a year, mostly children in sub-Saharan Africa. And we have always fought it by trying to, kill mosquitoes with insecticides or treating the parasite with drugs.
But the resistance is growing rapidly on both fronts, right? The bugs are getting stronger.
Exactly. So an international project called Transmission Zero is taking a radically different approach. Instead of killing mosquitoes, they're actually modifying them using CRISPR-Cas9 gene drives.
Okay, so for those of us listening who aren't geneticists, how does a gene drive actually work in the wild?
So in nature, an organism has a 50% chance of passing a specific genetic trait down to its offspring. A gene drive completely rewrites that rule. It essentially copies and pastes itself onto the partner chromosome during reproduction.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it forces the genetic modification into over 90% of the offspring. So over just a few generations, this biased inheritance allows a trait to spread like wildfire through a population.
That is incredible and terrifying.
Scientists are taking two different paths with this. The first strategy is population suppression. They target something called the double-sex gene.
The double-sex gene, what does that do?
It basically makes female mosquitoes sterile.
Yeah.
So eventually it causes the entire local population to just collapse.
Okay, and what is the second path?
The second path is population modification. So here they don't actually kill the mosquito. Instead, they insert genes that produce antimicrobial peptides. And these peptides actively attack the malaria parasite inside the mosquito's gut. It blocks the parasite from ever reaching the salivary glands and being transmitted to a human.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. A recent study out of Tanzania took this population modification into the real world. They built this high containment facility in a malaria endemic region.
Right.
And instead of using sterile lab parasites, they fed these modified mosquitoes blood taken from local children who were actually infected with malaria. And it worked. The antimicrobial peptides severely impaired the wild parasites.
It's a massive breakthrough.
It is, but I'm sorry, I have to push back here. Releasing genetically modified bugs that are literally designed to spread uncontrollably into the wild, that sounds like the beginning of a sci-fi horror movie. How is that not a massive ecological disaster waiting to happen?
Well, that is a completely valid fear. And it is exactly why the Tanzanian study utilized some pretty brilliant safety nets.
Like what?
Well, they used a split gene drive. So one line of mosquitoes carry the anti-malaria genes, while a completely separate line carried the Cas9 enzyme needed to drive it.
Oh, I see. So they have to be combined.
Exactly. The trait only spreads widely when researchers intentionally combine them. And they're also developing molecular off switches to reverse the drive if things go wrong.
That is reassuring.
Yeah. And if you are listening to this and wondering why we don't just release these everywhere tomorrow, it is because scientists do not view this as a standalone magic bullet. It is a powerful new tool, but ending malaria still requires bed nets, vaccines, and robust healthcare systems.
Speaking of populations and their growth, let's swing back to India and look deeper into the political dilemma of legislative expansion we touched on earlier. This is Article 4 from the Text and Context section.
Right, back to the delimitation dilemma.
We talked about the demographic fears of the South, but the government also introduced the 131st Constitution Amendment Bill, which was actually defeated in the Lok Sabha.
Yeah, the 131st Amendment was highly controversial, and mainly because it bundled entirely separate constitutional issues together.
Right.
It aimed to increase the Lok Sabha to 850 seats, determine which census would guide delimitation, and crucially, it sought to delink the one-third reservation for women from the 2027 census and tie it directly to this new delimitation process based on the 2011 census.
So they were tying women's reservation to the expansion of the House.
Exactly. The government argued that increasing the total seats by 50% would make it mathematically seamless to carve out those 272 seats reserved for women in an expanded House.
And to calm the fears of southern states who controlled their populations, Union Home Minister Amit Shah gave an oral assurance. He promised a 50% pro rata increase for each state.
Meaning every state's proportion of power in the Lok Sabha would remain exactly the same.
Right. But this raises an important question. If the government verbally promised to protect state representation, why did the opposition object so fiercely?
Well, the answer really lies in the 106th Amendment passed back in 2023. That amendment already established the legal framework to implement the one-third women's reservation within the existing 543 seats.
Right, without needing delimitation at all. It's like refusing to install a new security system until the entire House is expanded, even though the system fits perfectly in the current House.
That is exactly how the opposition saw it. They saw no logical reason to bundle women's reservation with the highly sensitive issue of delimitation.
Especially since Shah's promise of a pro rata increase was only an oral assurance. It wasn't explicitly written into the draft bills anywhere.
Precisely. And the core tension here is really a clash of fundamental democratic values.
How so?
Well, you have the democratic principle of one citizen, one vote, one value, which demands that seats reflect current population numbers. But pitted against that is the federal principle, demanding that states honoring national policies aren't politically penalized.
Right. And balancing those two forces while ensuring women's representation isn't held hostage in the crossfire, well, that is going to be the defining political challenge of the decade.
Absolutely.
So from debates on national democratic principles, let's zoom in on the everyday economic realities of citizens on the ground. This is Article 5. We are looking at the April 2026 notification from the Uttar Pradesh government revising minimum wages.
And this happened following intense labor unrest in industrial hubs like Noida and Ghaziabad.
Yes, the unrest was driven by severe wage stagnation against a really soaring cost of living. So the UP government categorized the state into 3 tiers.
Right. Category I includes the highly industrialized area, so Gatan Buddha Nagar and Ghaziabad. Under this new revision, monthly wages for Category I are set at 13,690 rupees for unskilled labor and up to 16,868 rupees for skilled labor.
And for you listening, the actual mechanism they are using to calculate this is what matters for long-term survival.
Yeah, the critical economic mechanic here is the variable dearness allowance, or VDA.
Right, the VDA.
The VDA is a component of the wage that is tied directly to the All India Consumer Price Index, the CPI. The idea is simple as the cost of basic goods goes up, the VDA automatically adjusts upward to protect the workers' purchasing power from being eaten by inflation.
But there was a massive problem in UP, right?
Yes. Wages were supposed to be revised based on the CPI averages in 2017 and 2023, but those revisions simply never happened.
They just skipped them.
Yeah. And during that massive delay, the consumer price index jumped from an index of 216 all the way to 425. So this 2026 revision is essentially an overdue correction to bridge that massive gap.
If you're listening to this, think about the tension here. For the workers in these industrial clusters, it finally offers partial relief from crushing inflation, but simultaneously, it instantly spikes labor costs for employers.
Right, it's a double-edged sword.
Exactly. In a state like Uttar Pradesh, which has a massive and incredibly hard-to-regulate informal sector, enforcing these new wages without causing mass job losses or driving businesses further underground is going to be a severe challenge for the state machinery.
It's going to be a very delicate balancing act.
Well, we just talked about physical labor and compensation. Now let's look at the digital infrastructure running our world and the invisible hands controlling it. This brings us to Article 6.
Moving into the cyber realm.
Yes. This month, the AI company Anthropic launched Project Glasswing, alongside a new AI model called Claude Mythos Preview.
And this model is specifically built to hunt down zero-day exploits.
Wait, just so we are on the same page before we get into the AI, what exactly makes a zero-day exploit so dangerous?
Right, so a zero-day exploit is a vulnerability in software that is entirely unknown to the vendor or the public. It means hackers have discovered a backdoor, and the creators of the software have had 0 days to fix it.
Ah, hence the name.
Exactly. And Mythos Preview has demonstrated an absolutely astonishing capability to autonomously hunt down these flaws. I mean, it found a 27-year-old flaw in OpenBSD, which is an operating system famous for its rigorous security.
27 years old.
Yes. It also found a 16-year-old bug in FFmpeg. And that is a video library so common that automated testing tools had previously analyzed the vulnerable code 5 million times and missed it.
And Mythos Preview found it.
It found it overnight.
That is terrifying and impressive, but who actually controls this tool?
Well, on paper, Project Glasswing looks like a noble defensive alliance. Anthropic gathered the titans of tech, so AWS, Google, Microsoft, and committed millions of dollars to fund open source developers to fix these bugs once the AI finds them.
Okay, that sounds good on paper.
It does, but structurally, if you look at the economics, it operates like a cybersecurity cartel. The companies granted exclusive access to the world's most powerful bug-finding tool are the exact same hyperscalers positioned to profit immensely from selling cloud security.
Oh, I see.
Look at Google's recent $32 billion acquisition of the cybersecurity firm Wiz. Cybersecurity is no longer just a feature, it is the core competitive differentiator for cloud providers.
So what does this all mean? The most conspicuous detail about Project Glasswing to me is who wasn't invited.
Right, OpenAI.
Exactly. OpenAI was left out in the cold, and their response was immediate. Just a week later, they launched GPT 5.4 Cyber, a model explicitly built for defensive security with far fewer restrictions. Are we witnessing the dawn of a corporate arms race here?
We really are.
Are we comfortable living in a world where AI companies unilaterally decide who gets the tools to defend themselves?
It's a huge concern. Because this level of vertical integration means that companies finding the vulnerabilities are the same ones selling you the platform to protect against them. It concentrates global digital security into an alarmingly small handful of private firms.
Right.
It creates a massive bottleneck of power over the internet's fundamental infrastructure.
Well, while tech giants are building and consolidating borders in cyberspace, actual physical borders are causing daily hardship for citizens in Punjab. This is Article 7, moving into our Spotlight section.
And this is a really heartbreaking, on-the-ground reality.
It is. Take Nirwar Singh, a farmer in Gurdaspur, Punjab. His family has been farming their land for generations, but right now over 11,000 farmers and 17,000 acres of cultivable land are trapped in a liminal space.
Right, because back in the 1980s, the border fence was erected 2 to 3 kilometers inside Indian territory, away from the actual international zero line.
Exactly. And the psychological and operational hurdles these farmers face daily are just agonizing.
Yeah, to simply reach their own land, they have to pass through gates controlled by the Border Security Force, the BSF. And these gates only open sporadically.
Right, it's not like they can just walk over whenever they want.
Not at all. Farmers face strict identity checks, physical frisking of their lunchboxes and seed pouches. And they're restricted to working strictly between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m.
And it affects what they can grow, too.
It does. Security protocols completely ban them from growing any crop taller than 3 feet, as it could supposedly provide cover for smugglers.
Which completely prevents crop diversification, meaning they cannot grow lucrative crops like paddy during the Kharif season. Imagine needing military clearance, a background check, and a ticking stopwatch just to water your own backyard garden, while knowing if you plant the wrong seed, it's classified as a national security threat.
It is quite literally farming in captivity.
But there is finally movement on this, right?
It is, yes. Punjab Chief Minister Bhagwant Mann recently pushed to relocate the fence to within 300 meters of the zero line. Surveys are actually currently underway across border districts.
Oh, that's great news.
It is. From an analytical perspective, this is one of those rare scenarios where every single stakeholder wins.
Well, it's a massive win for the farmers, obviously. It restores their livelihoods and their dignity. And politically, it yields massive goodwill across a dozen assembly constituencies ahead of the 2027 elections.
Right, and crucially, it actually improves national security.
How so?
Right now, BSF forces waste immense time and resources frisking Indian citizens who are just going about their daily work. If the fence is moved to the zero line, The newly demarcated area behind it becomes a true, easily monitored no man's land.
Making it far harder for antisocial elements to breach the border unnoticed.
Exactly. It clarifies the border.
Speaking of state authority and its impact on citizens, our final story looks at a horrific instance where state power turned into unchecked violence and how the justice system fought back. Article 8.
Yeah, the Sattankulam case.
We're looking at the historic verdict from the Madurai District Court, which sentenced 9 policemen to death for the brutal 2020 custodial murder of a father and son, Jairaj and Benix.
The brutality of this case really shook the conscience of the entire state. But what makes the legal aftermath so significant is the unprecedented and proactive role of the Madras High Court.
Right. They stepped in immediately.
Literally the day after the deaths, the High Court initiated suo motu proceedings. They recognized the immediate danger of a police cover-up, so they ordered revenue officials to physically seize control of the Sattankulam police station.
Just to prevent the accused officers from destroying vital evidence, that judicial intervention was incredible.
It was vital.
But we also have to confront the terrifying systemic failures that allowed the torture to happen in the first place. When the police brought Jairaj and Benix for remand, Judicial Magistrate Saravanan remanded the bleeding, battered men mechanically.
Right, without proper examination.
He didn't physically examine them or provide legal counsel. He completely failed his duty as a safeguard. Former Madras High Court Justice Chandru pointed out that this is indicative of a broader collapse of the legal services authority.
How did he frame it?
He said it has morphed from a shield for the poor into a bureaucratic machine obsessed with padding disposal data for luck adults.
Wow. And the medical context of this case is equally vital to understand for our listeners, as it exposes a very dark tactic used in custodial violence.
What was the cause of death?
Forensic experts identified it as traumatic rhabdomyolysis.
Rhabdomyolysis. Okay, what happens in the body during that?
When a person receives repeated heavy blows to their muscles, the muscle tissue actually breaks down and releases a protein called myoglobin into the bloodstream. In the blood, myoglobin becomes highly toxic, and it eventually causes acute kidney failure. Because this renal failure happens days after the physical assault, it creates a horrific loophole.
So the police hit them and they died days later from kidney failure.
Exactly. Police have historically used this to claim the victim died of natural causes later, basically escaping immediate liability for torture.
That is a terrifying loophole.
It is. But this verdict firmly closes that loophole, establishing that delayed, fatal consequences of torture remain the direct responsibility of the abusers.
Activists are rightfully hailing whistleblowers like Head Constable Ravathi as heroes for testifying against her colleagues. A landmark verdict is a victory for justice, but it doesn't erase the system that enabled the crime.
Right, the system is still there.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. If the initial safeguards, like local magistrates and medical officers, fail so completely to protect citizens, how do we enforce eternal vigilance in our own local institutions before a tragedy requires a high court rescue?
It's a heavy question, but an essential one.
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.